All right, hello again. In case you missed the last one, had some technical difficulties. My name is Jeff Pilcher, and Jimmy Sellers asked me to lead this training for y'all. Again, if there's some difficulties, it's my first time using this, so hopefully it'll work this time. I'm going to share on the screen one of the PowerPoints that we use for the summer scholars. These are Princeton review techniques that we use, and I'll elaborate on each of them. And then I'll end with maybe some suggestions for some things that you could do in boot camp. And everybody should have gotten an email from me, maybe a couple of those. If you have any questions that we can't resolve here, then if you want to email me, I'll definitely be willing to respond to those. Okay, so the first thing that we find important is that going into the test, being prepared, knowing the segments of the test, what to expect, directions, really saves students important time. So that is one of the things, kind of the first day that we emphasized. Now, I'm just going to focus on verbal. I believe y'all have already been through a session over the math. So for verbal, it's reading and writing and language. There are two different sections. For the reading, there are 5 passages. There are 47 questions, and then they have 60 minutes to answer those. And I'll get into the specifics of these on the following slides. And then for the writing and language component, it's less time, 35 minutes. Notice that there are 44 questions, so they have less than a minute per question. So they really do have to work at a quick pace, and they will have 4 different sections or passages for that one. These are some basic strategies that we use from Princeton Review. The students kind of chuckle with POOD, but I think that's an important one. And I've heard students that are teaching, or teachers that are teaching the CCR classes talk to me about this, that their students are taking too long trying to figure out which passage they should start with, or what kind of question they should start with. And that's why the practice is so important. By the time they take the test in the middle of October, they should have already kind of figured those things out and have an understanding of that going into the test. So POOD is personal order of difficulty. When we talk later about the reading, we'll get into that a little bit more. PO is process of elimination, narrowing down, eliminating wrong answers. There are more wrong answers than right answers, so you want to try and eliminate those. That will help not get stuck on trap answers and falling for those. And then finally, letter of the day. This is one we've used for a while, but it's very, very important, especially if kids are they're not working at a quick enough pace and they have, say, 10 questions at the end and they're about to run out of time, or they've had to skip a question because they're not penalized for incorrect answers anymore. So they don't want to leave anything blank. They want to use letter of the day if they just don't know. So those are 3 important strategies for the verbal section. And again, these are Princeton Review strategies. Okay, for the reading section, there are 5 different passages. There's 1 U.S. or world literature. These are generally pre-20th century passages. If the students are in AP Language or AP Lit, they'll probably have had some practice with these types. Maybe not as much if they're in on-level classes. So that would be important for them to practice on. Again, there's only 1 of those though. If the student is not an avid reader, that might not be the passage that they start with. So using POOD, their personal order of difficulty might lead them to picking history or science passages if they're more well-versed in those subjects. So there are 2 history and social studies. College Board now reports a sub-score similar to how the ACT does on math and science and some of those other categories. And then, of course, there are 2 science passages. Now, what the students will notice as they go through and work through passages is that there will be charts and graphs and paired passages throughout these. So even in the world literature, you could potentially get a chart or a graph. So and those will tie into synthesis questions, and we'll get to those in just a minute. Okay, so reading strategies, again, select the type of passage that's using POOD. They're going to look, and again, if they're not well-versed in fiction, then they might skip to the others. And then selecting type of questions. So following the reading passage, the first question is generally a main idea question. I call those later questions. They do need to answer those, but they might choose letter of the day if they just don't know. But If they answer the other questions, the other 9 or 10 questions that they'll have for that passage, they'll read the majority of, probably from 75 to 85 or 90% of the passage they'll end up reading. And so they will be able to go back and answer those main idea type questions later without wasting time. And seconds are precious on this test. So they're going to select the type of question. Generally, they're going to skip the very first question following the passage, and then they might go to the next one. They want to look at line reference questions. Those are very easy to spot. And what we recommend is that they read about 4 or 5 lines above and 4 or 5 lines below. That will give them enough context for what they're looking at. Chronology, it's based in loose chronological order. So if question 1 is the main idea, so that's not going to fall in there. But question 2 might be line 5 in the first paragraph. Question 4 might be in line 50. So that question 3 is going to fall somewhere in the middle of those. And then lead words, looking for words that are italicized or capitalized. Those are important strategies. With the summer scholars, there was one passage where the word Catholic was there, and it only occurred once in the passage. It was capitalized. You could do a quick skim and find that word, and it led you directly to the answer. So lead words can help as well. Okay, 5 steps of the reading basic approach. The first step is to read the blurb that's above the reading passage. That will tell them a lot about the type of passage that it is. And again, it will notify them very quickly if it's something that they want to skip or if it's something that they want to go ahead and tackle. The next step, select and understand a question. We just talked about that a little bit. Again, those line reference questions are easy places to start. Because it tells them exactly where to look to find the answer in the passage. One of the things that I tell the students is that, remember, it's an open book test, that everything that they need is on the page in front of them, and they just have to find it. Step 3 is read what you need. Again, 5 lines above and 5 lines below is the general rule there. Number 4 is critical. Predict the answer. If they're able to predict the answer before they look at the answer choices, they often will not fall for the common traps. And then lastly, use PO, use process of elimination, narrow down your answer choices, eliminate the ones that you know are incorrect. I suggest that if they see absolutes like always or never or extreme language or language that could be offensive, all of those are reasons to eliminate answer choices. Okay, mastering PO. A lot of times students will get frustrated because they can narrow it down to 2 answers, but they don't know which one to pick from there. And so mastering PO, the common trap answers, generally will help with those situations. So if it's mostly right but slightly wrong, they're going to go with the other choice there. And what generally happens on a tone type question, they'll give you 2 possibilities. So they'll say that the tone of the passage is blank and blank. And the first blank might be accurate in describing the passage, but the second one might not. And that would be mostly right, slightly wrong. If it could be true, this, again, everything that they're going to need to answer the questions will be on the test. So if they're predicting something that is based off what could possibly logically happen, that's not going to be an answer. It has to be in the text. It has to be directly stated in the passage. And then lastly, deceptive language. Because they are high school students, they often fall prey to extreme language. That's how they tend to communicate, social media and such. So deceptive language will often get them extreme language, again, absolutes like always and never, because it really speaks to how they see the world and they're kind of passionate about things. So those are things to caution them about and help them maybe avoid some of those. Okay, the question types on the reading passage, you have information and ideas, and again, those are pretty much based on a reading of the passage, summarizing from the passage, and then they'll get into rhetoric and synthesis, which are the higher skill set. Again, if the student is an AP language, they're probably getting practice with these, but if they're not, then that might be something that they need to go through and practice. So rhetoric, you're looking at the author's purpose. Why is the author using this particular word? What is the author's argument? those types of questions. And then synthesis you'll find in paired passages, where there will be a couple of questions at the end of the paired passage that ask to find commonalities between the passages or differences. And then also when you have a graph or chart or something of that nature that is paired with a reading passage. Okay, now the writing section. Princeton Review says that they need to be a proofreader and an editor in the section. And the best strategy here is to look for what's changing in the answer. It might be a semicolon in one answer choice. That same punctuation might be replaced by a comma in another. The third might not have any punctuation. And so they really need to look for what's changing in the answer, and then they can determine whether that's right or not. Princeton Review has some strategies for that: half stops, full stop, and go. And I'll show those on a slide. And that might work for some students if they don't, for example, know that the rule for using a semicolon is that it joins two independent clauses. Princeton Review strategies might be helpful for that. I found that for some students they might be a little confusing, so you'll have to determine what works best for your students. But on this slide you'll see that stop punctuation, it's a period, a semicolon, comma plus a fanboy, question marks and exclamation marks. So a lot of end punctuation and then a couple of other reasons why. So if they need to fully stop, if it's going to take a long pause there, they would need to see that kind of punctuation and look for that in the answer choice. If they think that it's a brief stop, a half stop, then they should see a colon or a long dash in the answer choice. And if they don't think that they need to stop at all, if it's a go, then there should be either a comma there or no punctuation whatsoever. So those are things to look for in the answer choices. Okay, comma rules, those are important. There were a lot of questions that deal with them. So stop punctuation with one of the fanboys, that would be a reason. Go punctuation after every item in a list. So the SAT, the PSAT, they are going to use the Oxford comma. Your students don't necessarily need to understand the Oxford comma rule, but there's a little graph in the slide here that kind of shows the difference. But again, if they are listing items, that they do need to use them there. And then before and after unnecessary information to set that off. Okay, apostrophes, they will be tested. So possession and contractions. It might be helpful to pull up a list and go over some of these, like words like its, for example. Does it need the apostrophe or not? And then for words, a lot of these, you're going to look at consistency. So is the word that's underlined consistent in tense and structure with the other words? Is it, an English teacher would probably say, is it parallel? Is it parallel structure? Precision, is it the right word? Is it the most accurate way of expressing the idea? And then concision, brevity. One of the kind of tricks that we told the students was to start by looking at the shortest answer, the most concise answer. And if that one isn't the correct answer choice, if there's something nonsensical about it, go to the next shortest, and one of those two is likely going to be the correct answer. Not always, but it was a good strategy to kind of help them determine which answer choices they wanted to start with and to go through that process of elimination. Okay, and that is it for the slideshow. I'm going to flip back over to the camera, and I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the strategies that you might use. So let me get my camera adjusted, and I will continue. Okay, so one of the things you might do is use one of these booklets that all the students should have received through their English class. It might be something that you ask them to bring to class. Let's see, is that, and that's flipped. Okay, so they do have, and it would have come in a student guide like this, and so but there was a practice test in there. So one of the things you might do if you're running out of materials or don't have something, you might have them bring the practice test. and then they can do some practice there. Now I'm going to show what we kind of did with some of the Princeton review materials, and I realize that this is kind of flipped. I'm going to try and clear this up a bit. Okay, and that's not going to work very well. Nope. Okay, I cannot get my camera to zoom correctly, so this might not help as much as I had intended. Let me see if that'll work. But what we did is we went through and we used PO, and we used all of those strategies I just talked about, and we went through and we kind of marked up the passage. So just a couple of things, and again, I understand that the image might not be clear here, but I can still kind of talk about them. One of the things to talk to the kids about is that on the newer PSAT, which is the only PSAT and SAT now, is that they have paired questions. So this one here is question 3, and this one here is question 4. And question 4 will say, based on the evidence in these lines. And so one of the things that we had kids do was literally match them up. So down here at the bottom, we wrote A, B, C, and D for number 3, and then A, B, C, and D for number 4. And then we drew lines and matched them. And this really allows the student to use PO, use process of elimination, because there has to be a match here. So they can eliminate answer choices that don't match up to number 3. So these are questions that might take a little bit longer, but they should get both of the points there. And really, it's about point acquisition. Okay, going back to this is question 1 following the passage, and I indicated that this was a main idea question by marking it later. So it would be a question that they would come back to. And so if I'm using POOD here, personal order of difficulty, I'm probably going to start with question 2 here. Okay, so briefly, I'm just going to talk about some of the other resources, and then I'll kind of end the session. If I get my face on camera here. Okay, so some other tools. I believe Mr. Sellers might have shared some of the Princeton review with each of you, and if so, that's a great resource. Princeton Review does make course guides, and you can always recommend the students if they're really going to try this, because they really do need to do a lot of practice. So you might recommend that they go out and they get one of those. That could be something that you have them use in class, and it's set up to time them. Working through timed practices is very important so that they're used to the pacing of it. College Board has resources as well, and we also have the Khan Academy that's going to time them and have SAT and PSAT types of questions. So I would go to any of those resources, and Mr. Sellers might have already shared those with each of you. But I just kind of show you on camera. This is the coursework book that we used, and there was a digital copy of this that we had access to in a Dropbox account. So that might be something that you look at. If you have access to that, all the strategies that I just went through are there. And one of the other strategies, if you don't have these resources, probably go and find like some AP language type materials, because there are a lot of similarities between the AP language test and the PSAT and SAT. So that could be another resource. You might have some questions on there that aren't exactly what they're going to ask on PSAT, but if you're kind of struggling to find resources, that might be an option for you. Okay, it's about 3:30 now, so I think we've covered the time that we needed. Again, Jeff Pilcher, email me if you have any questions, if you're able to see this. I'd be happy to email you back and share some more resources that I have. And I'm in 2266 at Rowlett. You can always stop by and come and look at some of the resources I have in my classroom if you find that helpful. All right, have a good afternoon, everyone. Hope you got something out of this. And again, I hope to hear from you if you have more questions. Thank you.